It's Dr. Lisa Graham. I'm a naturopath and I work at Heartland Family Wellness Center. And today we want to talk about a concept. And actually this concept could be a defining moment in your life and in your health history if you let it. What I have found over the years of working with thousands of patients is that there is an accumulation of interference that happens to the nervous system. And whether we remember these different interferences or injuries or not, they're remembered by the body like little footprints left behind. So, for example, sperm health and egg health, we're recognizing now today with fertility, it's a real thing. And so the health of your mom and dad going into you, were they smokers? Were they in love? Were they under stress? Those kinds of things determine that sperm health and that egg health and then the health of the embryo. And when we look a little further, we see that there can be different interferences to that embryo's success, right? So for example, let's say that there's physical, chemical, and emotional interference. Let's break it down to those three. And these interferences can accumulate. So for example, let's look at the physical. The birth process itself, I am pregnant right now. The birth process itself is a really important time. And some births are very traumatic. There's a lot of pulling on that head and neck with about 90 to 120 pounds of pressure. That is going to physically interfere. And that's going to be a first layer for that little baby. Another layer of accumulation can be physical. Let's say the baby's just learning to walk and the dog crashes into her because the dog wants to race her down the stairs and the little toddler goes tumbling down those stairs. Again, that's another physical layer of interference. Maybe it's a fall off the change table, right? Another physical layer of interference. Every once in a while, a child sometimes gets a spanking. It's not exactly an unemotional affair, and it's not exactly a, usually there's some physical implications, right, in that affair. So those are just some of the physical interferences and the layers that can accumulate. Then we take a look at, for example, emotional interferences. Let's say that mom and dad are going through a period where they're financially really stressed. Little kids are so sensitive to their environment, and we might not talk about it in front of them, but they can pick it up. Let's say it's a place where the female isn't respected by the male. Again, a little kid sensitive to the environment, they pick it up, I promise you. It could be a thing where it's a war zone, and again, these kids, it's that emotional layers. These emotional layers start to accumulate. It could be a thing where the parents, and we see this a lot today, the parents they get home from work and they're just watching TV or playing video games, and there's just not a lot of love and nurturing going on between them. Again, these little kids, it's like an imprint on their nervous system. And those are just the physical and emotional interferences that are possible. And so this little kid that kind of, started coughing a little bit later on in life and starts coughing, and then all of a sudden one day we go from that cough to a place of and they get this diagnosis and it's just 1 degree hotter. What happened? The little kid went to school that day and was picked on a little bit, and they come home and they've got this kind of, and now we go from a place of what we call actual health equilibrium into a place, we pass thresholds into a place called disease adaptation. And by the time we get into disease adaptation, we get a diagnosis. And now this kid has enough interference and enough layers that just 1 degree hotter getting picked on that day put them into a totally different state. So for example, with water, you go from a liquid state, 1 degree hotter. Now it's been raising in temperature, 1 degree hotter, and all of a sudden that water is boiling and it changes to vapor. Just 1 degree, yet significant change in matter. And the same thing when we hit thresholds with a child's health, okay? And this is why, for example, with heart attack patient, the day before they could have been examined. I've heard that, haven't you, right? And they're in perfect health, but they weren't. That interference is accumulated. They come in for the Monday for their work, and by 9:30 they're laid out and they have this heart attack. Now, if they really think that it just was like a magic bullet that happened and hit them, they're not going to realize how difficult and how intensive it's going to be to get them better. And they're going to just hope for this magical kind of thing. But the truth is about a heart attack that those arteries and that heart have been clogging for decades. And it's the same thing with cancer. When people think, oh, I just got diagnosed, it just happened yesterday. It did not happen yesterday. The diagnosis happened yesterday, but it was building for years. And these millennials, they're understanding that disease is progressive, degenerative in nature, and chronic. Because when somebody gets put on blood pressure medication, they've seen their grandparents started with blood pressure. And if we think that that's going to be resolved, give me a break. They know that no, then the next medication was added, and it was the cholesterol med, and then the next one was added. And they recognize that these diseases, and they want to do something different. So these layers of accumulation are a real thing, and threshold is a real thing. And I'll give you one last example talking about these footprints and this accumulation. Let's say there's a patient that has lung cancer, and they come in to see their oncologist, and they just snuck a cigarette, okay? And again, lots of people don't smoke anymore, and I'm so grateful because it was a massive, massive deficit in terms of interference to health, chemical. So the person comes in and he just snuck a cigarette. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this person just snuck a cigarette. So the oncologist says to him, you know, it's not that last cigarette that you snuck that's killing you. And the patient looks at him and says, what do you mean, doc? I thought you said cigarette smoking was killing me. So, you know, you remember that last cigarette. It's not that one. It's the accumulation of all the cigarettes you've smoked over a lifetime. That accumulation that has created this cancer in your body. And that's what we're talking about. And that's why it takes work to get well. So that's why I'm here. I'm not a magical doctor. I'm not here to fix you. You're not broken, in my opinion. But there are layers of interference, almost like an onion, that we have to remove to get patients back below threshold so they get back into health equilibrium. Dr. Lisa signing off. Naturopath.